I love running communities and working in communities because it's how I've met both of the amazing people I'm with today. But my career has kind of coincidentally been bookended by database companies. I have the amazing privilege right now to work for Cockroach Labs, which is the incredible company behind the highly resilient distributed SQL database, open source database, and just a phenomenal company and a phenomenal community to work for and in. But my career started in the more legacy database world. I was at Oracle for many years. I was at Hyperion. But I had the privilege at that time, and really just the luck of being in the tools or the applications side of things. So I was always spending my career thinking about what are the really cool things you can do with data? Like, how can data work for you? Because it's only as interesting as what it can do for you. What are the interesting questions to ask? How are we gonna make our data work for us? And that's when I got into OLAP servers, which was super cool because finally there was a business analytical way to think about data and to organize data with multidimensional databases. And then I started working for a complex event processing startup. And you know, if you thought business analytics was sexy, wait till you see complex event processing.
Absolutely.
Because they always told us in BI, oh, it's real time, but it's not really. It's going against an operational data store, it's in a data warehouse. But complex event processing, where you're reading unstructured data, you're reading videos, feeds, like think about the applications, the use cases that would blow your mind that you can do. Some of them a little shady, right? But some of them not so legal. But it's amazing technology. So now this was all kind of the first half of my career, and this was all, I'm telling you this because these are the days that I'm sure you don't remember, but we've been in this gig a long time, and I'm talking about client server, and back when client server was cool, right?
Indeed.
This is way before VMware did their thing. But then here comes the cloud, right? Game changer. And all of a sudden I end up in infrastructure and data center management, and I'm thinking, well, how did I get here and why am I sitting between the network and the storage teams? Like, what am I doing here? But open source saved me. That was when I really started understanding the value of open source communities and what you can build with, social coding movements and really mobilizing global initiatives to work on the same project. And that's really when I just had the honor of working in and building the original OpenStack community and growing that to be the largest, and then the Cloud Foundry community and that amazing community, and then Istio, and now Kubernetes, and running, as you mentioned, the world's largest CNCF user group. So having the privilege of doing all of that has just been the career opportunities it's given me, the people that I've got to meet, but really the questions that I get to ask about technology. So it's been kind of a strange career, but it's been an amazing career. And to end up, at Cockroach and getting to build out the developer relations team and the Cockroach community is just the next great challenge.
Very, very good. Now, Sam, in your case, how did you arrive at data? What's your experience been? And can you maybe tell us some things we don't normally hear? Perhaps a little bit about The Hague, perhaps a little bit about UCSD.
Sure, yeah. So I got to meet Lisa when she was leading the OpenStack community, and that was extraordinary. I think your community leadership has been outstanding. You can just look at the results in scale, scope, contribution, satisfaction, career outcomes for so many people, and then you start seeing them bridge communities, right? So not every technology is meant to last forever, but the community components can last forever. And so I think about distributed cognition, right? And what are the problems that the world wants to have solved, and we're all just kind of part of its processing core as a way to understand the world. So as you said, I grew up in Holland, 7th to 12th grade, so 1983 to 89. That was a really interesting experience to realize that there's many ways of looking at a problem that aren't just one, right? I think growing up in the US, I was part of a very linear school of thought, right, which includes a certain, manifest destiny. There's one true way, there's one right truth. And what I found living in Holland, among people who spoke French, Dutch, German, right, was that there are many ways of looking at reality. There are many different subjective truths. There may not actually be one objective truth, but it's all in how we choose to put these thoughts in language, how we share language with each other. And now when I look at data at this end of my career, it's really a language of thinking about problems together. As somebody said recently, right, data is by definition without context, otherwise it would be information. So as we turn it into information, we're doing that with other human beings, we're doing it in the context of a community. I did a degree in cognitive science at UC San Diego back when the AI revolution was having its second winter. So I learned AI and neuroscience, but interestingly, cognitive psychology and anthropology. So how do you start to dig into these elements of that and philosophy to kind of go, what the heck is going on? What are we working on? How do we work on it together? So it's kind of a odd path, because for someone who's been around the computer industry as long as I have, and to not have a CS degree of any shape, right? Not a bachelor's, not a master's, it's taken me a long while to kind of get to the point where I go, oh, and that's cool, right? There's a part of what I'm really good at that connects what other people work on, and we are, by design, incomplete. And I think that's what brings community together. If we just accept, hey, none of us is intended to be complete or perfect, but together we can be complete and perfect. How do we find those other parts of who we're supposed to be solving problems with? So I think that kind of brings us to where we are today. I got to see what you were doing with the CNCF user groups from a very close adjacency. We both have worked with folks like Kelsey Hightower, was at Google in 2016 to 2018, working on the Kubernetes business, among others, focusing on developer communities, developer tooling. And then what's brought me to Data now is realizing that so many of the problems that Kubernetes fundamentally solved now need to be replicated into other domains. To some degree, 2010, networking was actually being containerized by people like Andy Bechtolsheim and others who figured out, how do you take what we have in networking equipment and network algorithms, which can only currently really address a few thousand nodes, let's say in 2000, to billions. Well, by 2010, they could address billions, right? They created effectively a flat network space across billions of endpoints. Shocking. 2010 to 2020, we had a decade where Kubernetes inherited a lot of the goodness of Docker and of containers and C groups and all the different components that have been put into different expectations that developers had, different bits of the Linux kernel, and said, okay, now you can have billions of instances. So billions of endpoints, billions of instances. This is kind of this commodity curve, which I now think of as containerization. The next thing is that all those containerized apps and the containerized networks need some containerized data. So I think we got a good decade ahead of us to figure out, what is that perfect pairing? How do we take data and make it reproducible? How do we make it mergeable? How do we make it forkable? How do you make it work like CI/CD? And then how do you start to control it and understand it in these ways that you could apply, for example, with Istio? You've got a service mesh that can do all this cool aspect-oriented, assessments, analysis, control of all these things that are happening, this complex, right, coming and going distributed system. But what about the data? What about the data? What about the data? It's been left behind, right? So how do we desegregate kind of this world of data where it's stuck often in monoliths under lock and key and under sort of old school approaches to unit economics, and kind of drag it into the present of computing, and that will be the future of data. So that's what's kind of got me into the world of data, despite, again, not really having a background. I'm not one of Stonebreaker's students. I'm not a student of one of Stonebreaker's students, right? All the people that kind of descend in this hierarchy of genius of how you actually manage the data. Just kind of more of I'm like a technical bumblebee. I'm like, let me buzz around here. This is kind of interesting. That sounds like something I heard over here. Let me go check with these people. And just kind of bit by bit, I think that's maybe how we think about constructing technical communities for the sake of solving a really big problem that the world is ready to have solved.